Look, Alex is someone I get along very well with. The physical battle, but obviously against the opponent that was playing on a high level. So I'm glad to overcome it.
Novak Djokovic has shared a court with Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, and Carlos Alcaraz. He has watched every kind of talent emerge and fade across 3 decades at the top of this sport. He does not throw praise around carelessly. He doesn't need to impress anyone, and he has nothing to gain from flattering a 20-year-old who just lost in the round of 16. So when Djokovic went out of his way, unprompted ahead of Miami, to talk about Alex Eala in the way that he did, the tennis world stopped and listened. Because this wasn't a polite compliment. This was Djokovic telling you exactly what he saw. And what he saw surprised even him. What do you think Eala does at Miami? Drop your prediction in the comments right now. Let's get into it. Here's the thing about how Djokovic praised Eala that gets overlooked when people summarize it. He didn't lead with her results. He didn't talk about the ranking jump, or the wins over top 10 players, or the sold-out stadiums. The first thing he reached for was her response to losing. After the round of 16 exit at Indian Wells, Djokovic visited Eala and spent time on court with her. And what he said afterward was specific. He said he was blown away by how inspired she was. Not by how talented she was. Not by how well she hit the ball. By how inspired she was. The day after a tournament ended in disappointment, in a setting where nobody would have blamed her for taking a breath before refocusing.
So I have to figure it out. I was really blown away by how inspired she was. I mean, I was blown away by watching.
That word, inspired, is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Djokovic has seen what the best athletes in the world look like up close across an entire career. He knows the difference between a player going through the motions after a loss and a player who is genuinely locked in, genuinely driven, genuinely hungry for what comes next. He watched Eala and saw the second thing, and it moved him enough to say so publicly. That is not a casual observation. That is one of the greatest competitors in the history of sport recognizing something real in a player who is only just beginning. The on-court session itself is worth unpacking. Djokovic described it as his first real time playing with her in that kind of setting. He said it was fun. He mentioned the laughter. But then he added the line that landed differently. He said, "She is actually good." 3 words. But consider who is saying them and what they mean coming from him. Djokovic has hit balls with virtually every elite player on the planet. His frame of reference for what good looks like is not the same as anyone else's. When he says a player is actually good, with that specific word, actually, as if the quality exceeded what he anticipated, that is experience talking. That is someone who has seen thousands of players and immediately knows what separates the ones who belong from the ones who are still becoming. He spent real time on that court with her and came away with more respect than he walked in with. That doesn't happen often, and it doesn't happen by accident. But step back from the specific comments for a moment and look at the bigger picture they reveal. Because the pattern of how established figures in this sport are responding to Eala has become one of the most telling parts of her story. Tommy Haas, as tournament director of Indian Wells, watched the crowds overwhelming his venue and called it fantastic. The clearest evidence of what tennis becoming a global sport actually looks like in practice. Martina Navratilova laughed before she even started answering the question about Eala, then called her crafty, praised the left-handed variety as a genuine tactical weapon, and compared her ceiling to Manny Pacquiao, before saying it might actually be higher. Jessica Pegula, a top 10 player with zero obligation to say anything, sat in a press conference after Eala's loss and vouched for her long-term trajectory without hesitation.
Yeah, I mean, she's really good tennis player. Goes for her shots, takes the ball early, rips. Being a lefty is always tricky, competes really well. I mean, obviously she's beaten a lot of top players this week. I don't really think she needs me to tell her that she's a great player, that we're not going to see enough of her, but we definitely are.
These are not people who coordinate their messaging. These are people across different generations, different roles, and different relationships to the sport, all arriving independently at the same conclusion. something real is happening here. And the people who have spent their careers learning to distinguish genuine talent from temporary noise are all pointing in the same direction.
Alex is amazing. Hopefully she's the next podcast guest and we can kind of get to know her and talk to her more. But the way that she's been able to pack stadiums and the way that her country supports her is something special, and she handles it, I feel like, so maturely and with such grace, and she just seems so appreciative of all the support she gets, and always seems to have a good head on her shoulders and a good attitude about it.
Pegula's description of the atmosphere is the one that keeps growing in significance the more you sit with it. You can hear it from the hotel, at night. The crowd roaring for a player who had just lost and was no longer competing in the tournament. That is not a fan base that shows up for wins and disappears after losses. That is a community that is emotionally invested in the journey, regardless of the scoreline. And Pegula, who experienced it firsthand when Eala's crowd turned Miami into something that felt like a home match for her opponent, understood immediately that what she was watching wasn't a temporary spike of enthusiasm. It was something that had been building week after week, tournament after tournament, and was only getting louder. The fact that Pegula is saying this publicly, as a competitor who has directly felt the weight of that crowd on the wrong side of it, makes it land completely differently than if a commentator or a journalist said it. This is a peer testimony. This is someone who has been in the room and is telling you it's unlike anything else on the tour right now. Now let's talk about what Miami means, because it's not just the next tournament on the calendar. It is the specific tournament where everything started. The 2025 Miami Open semifinal run is the moment Alex Eala became a name that the global tennis audience recognized. Beating Madison Keys, beating Jelena Ostapenko, 2 Grand Slam champions, before the run ended. The crowds that overwhelmed the venues. The moment Pegula looked up in her own home tournament and didn't recognize the energy in the building. That was Miami. That was where the blueprint was written. She goes back now in a completely different position, ranked inside the top 30, seated at a WTA 1000 event for the first time, coming off 3 top 10 wins across the past 2 tournaments. With Djokovic's words still fresh, with Pegula's endorsement still echoing, with a fan base that has only expanded since that first Miami run introduced her to the world. The points from last year's semi-final run are also due for defense. A deep run matches them and keeps the ranking intact. A title run, which is not impossible for a player who has just demonstrated she can beat anyone in the field on any given day, would push her into the top 20 for the first time, and fundamentally change the structural conversation about where she sits in this sport. The top 20 changes seedings at Grand Slams. It changes the draws she enters. It changes what the WTA has to say about her. Not because the federation suddenly becomes generous, but because the numbers leave no room for any other interpretation. Here's the thing that Djokovic's praise actually confirms, beyond the specific words he used. The players and figures who know this sport most deeply are not talking about Eala the way you talk about someone who had a good run. They are talking about her the way you talk about someone who is genuinely arriving. There is a specific tone that experienced people in professional sports use when they recognize a talent that is going to be significant for a long time. It's not excited, it's not surprised, it's settled. It sounds like someone who has already processed the information and arrived at a conclusion. Djokovic talking about being blown away by her inspiration. Navratilova comparing her ceiling to Pacquiao and going higher. Pegula saying, "We're definitely going to be seeing a lot more of her," and she proved that. Settled. Concluded. Already decided. Djokovic said, "Alex is someone I get along very well with on and off the court." That line, on and off the court, is the one that most people glossed over. It's the quietest thing Djokovic said and possibly the most significant. It means the respect isn't limited to what she does between the lines. It extends to who she is when the cameras aren't on her, when the crowd isn't watching, when there's nothing to perform. That's the kind of assessment that doesn't get revised. Alex Eala left Indian Wells in the round of 16. She didn't win the tournament. She didn't make the final. By the purely numerical measure, the result was a step short of her previous Miami run. And yet Novak Djokovic visited her the next day and came away talking about being blown away. Jessica Pegula said the tennis world hasn't seen enough of her yet and won't be able to say that for much longer. The crowds that showed up in Indian Wells could be heard from the hotel at night. Tommy Haas called the whole thing fantastic. Navratilova said, "Fix the serve," and the conversation changes completely. One loss in the round of 16 generated more meaningful, substantive praise from more credible voices than most players receive in an entire career. That tells you everything about the difference between a result and a trajectory. Miami is next. The tournament that started everything. The crowds will follow. The attention will follow. And based on everything Djokovic just said about what he saw when he spent time with her after the loss, the inspiration, the hunger, the quality that made even him say, "She's actually good," the tennis will follow too. This story didn't end at Indian Wells. It just found another gear. Hit like, subscribe, and drop your Miami prediction in the comments. Because if Djokovic is already watching this closely, you probably should be too.